आइए पढ़ें डॉक्टर बी आर अम्बेडकर को। रीडिंग अम्बेडकर स्पीचेस एट राउंड टेबल कॉन्फ्रेंस बाय डॉक्टर बी आर अम्बेडकर। आई एम गोइंग टू रीड आउट द actual speech by Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, Speeches at Round Table Conference. Part 1. Need for Political Power for Depressed Classes. Plenary Session, 5th sitting on 20th September 1930. So we are going to read today Plenary Session, 5th sitting on 20th September 1930. It means there were already 4 sittings had taken place, and now we are going to read about 5th sitting on 20th September 1930. And let's start with the quote. Mr. Chairman, my purpose in rising to address this conference is principally to place before it the point of view of the depressed classes, whom I and my colleagues Rao Bahadur Srinivasan have the honor to represent. Regarding the question of constitutional reform, it is a point of view of 43 million people, or 1/5 of the total population of British India. The depressed classes form a group by themselves which is distinct and separate from the Mohammedans, and although they are included among the Hindus, they in no sense form an integral part of that community. Not only have they a separate existence, but they have also assigned to them a status which is individually distinct from the status occupied by any one community in India. There are communities in India which occupy a lower and subordinate position, but the position assigned to the depressed classes is totally different. It is one which is midway between that of the serf and the slave, which may for convenience be called servile, and this difference that the serf and the slave were permitted to have physical contact, from which the depressed classes are debarred. What is worse, that this enforced severity and bar to human intercourse due to their untouchability involved not merely the possibility of discrimination in public life, but actually works out as a positive denial of all equalities of opportunity and the denial of those most elementary of civic rights on which all human existence depends. I am sure that the point of view of such a community, as large as the population of England or of France, and so heavily handicapped in the struggle for existence, cannot but have some bearing on the right sort of solution of the political problem. And I am anxious that this conference should be placed in possession of that point of view, that at the very start. The point of view which I will try to put as briefly as I can, it is that the bureaucratic form of government in India should be replaced by a government which will be a government of people, by the people and for the people. The statement of the view of the depressed classes, I am sure, will be received with some surprise in certain quarters. The tie that bounds the depressed classes to the British has been a unique character. The depressed classes welcomed the British as their delivers from age-long tyranny and oppression by orthodox Hindus. They fought their battle against the Hindus, the Muslims and Sikh, and have won for this great empire of India. The British on their side assumed the role of trustees of the depressed classes. In view of such an intimate relationship between the parties, this change in attitude of the depressed classes towards British rule in India is undoubtedly a most momentous phenomenon. But the reason for this change of attitude are not far to seek. We have not taken this decision simply because we wish to throw out lot with the majority. Indeed, as you know, there is not much love between the majority and the particular minority I represent. Ours is an independent decision. We have judged of the existence administration solely in the light of our own circumstances, and we have found it waiting in some of the most essential elements of good government. When we compare our present position with one which it was our lot to bear in Indian society of the pre-British days. We find that instead of marching on, we are only marking time. Before the British, we were in the loathsome condition due to our untouchability. Has the British government done anything to remove it? Before the British, we could not enter the temple. Can we enter now? Before the British, we were denied entry into the police force. Does the British government admit us in the forces? Before the British, we were not allowed to serve in the military. Is that career open to us? To one of these questions, can we give an affirmative answer that the British, who have held so far a sway over us for such a long time, have done some good, we cheerfully acknowledge, but there is certainly no fundamental change in our position. Indeed, so far we were concerned, the British government has accepted the social arrangements as it found them and has preserved them faithfully in the manner of the Chinese tailor who, which given an old cast as a pattern, produced with pride an exact replica, rent, patches and all. Our wrongs have remained as open source. And they have not been righted, although 150 years of British rule have rolled out. We do not accuse the British of indifference or want of sympathy. We want to find is that they are quite incompetent to tackle our problem. If the case was one of the indifference only, it would have been a matter of small moment, and it would not have made such a profound change in our attitude. But what we have come to realize on deeper analysis of the situation is that it is not merely a case of indifference, rather it is a case of sheer incompetence to undertake the task. The depressed classes find that British government in India suffer from two very serious limitations. There is first of all an internal limitation, which arises from the character, motives and interests of those who are in power. It is not because they cannot help us in these things, but because it is against their character, motives and interests to do so. The second consideration that limits its authority is the mortal fear it has of external resistance. The government of India does realize the necessity of removing the social evils which are eating into the vital of Indian society and which have blighted the lives of the downtrodden classes so far many years. The government of India does realize that the landlords and squeezing the masses dry, and capitalists are not giving the laborers a living wages and decent condition of work. Yet it is most painful thing that it has not dared to touch any of these evils. Why? It is because it has not legal power to remove them. No, the reason why it does not intervene is because it's afraid that its intervention to amend the existing code of social and economic life will give rise to resistance. Of what good is such a government to anybody under a government paralyzed between two such limitations? Much that goes to make life good must remain held up. We must have a government in which the man in power will give their individual undivided alliances to the best interest of the country. We must have a government in which man in power, knowing where obedience will end and resistance will begin, will not be afraid to amend the social and economic role of life which the detached of justice and expediency so urgently call for. This role the British government will never be able to play. It is only the government which is of the people, for the people and by the people that will make this possible. These are some of the questions raised by the depressed classes and the answers which in their view these questions seem to carry. This is therefore the inevitable conclusion which the depressed classes have come to, namely that the bureaucratic government of India with the best of motives will remain powerless to effect any change so far as our particular grievances are concerned. We feel that nobody can remove our grievances as well as we can, and we cannot remove them unless we get political power in our hands. No share of this political power can evidently come to us so long as the British government remain as it is. It is only in Swaraj condition that we stand any chance of getting the political power into our own hands, without which we cannot bring salvation to our people. There is one thing, sir, to which I wish to draw your particular attention. It is this: I have not used the expression dominion status in placing before you the point of view of the depressed classes. I have avoided using it not because I do not understand its implications, or nor does the omission means that the depressed classes object to India's attaining dominion status. My chief ground for not using it is that it does not convey the full content of what the depressed classes stand for. The depressed classes, while they stand for dominion status with safeguard, wish to lay all the emphasis they can on one question and on the question alone. And that question is, how will dominion Indian function? Where will the center of the political power be? Who will have it? Will the depressed classes be heirs to it? These are the questions that form their chief concern. The depressed classes feel that they will get no shred of the political power unless the political machinery for the new constitution is of the special make. In the construction of that machine, certain hard facts of Indian social life must not be lost sight of. It must be recognized that Indian society is a gradation of caste forming an ascending scale of reverence and descending scale of contempt. A system which gives no scope for the growth of that sentiment of equality and fraternity so essential for a democratic form of government. It must also be recognized that while the intelligentsia is a very important part of Indian society, it is drawn from its upper strata and although speaks in the name of the country and leads of the political movement, it has not shed the narrow particularism of the class from which it is drawn. In other words, what the depressed classes wish to urge is that the political machine must take account of and must have a definite relation to the psychology of a society for which it is devised. Otherwise, you are likely to produce a constitution which, however symmetrical, will be truncated one and the total misfit to the society for which it is designed. There is one point with which I should like to deal before I close this matter. We are often reminded that the problem of the depressed class is a social problem and that its solution lies elsewhere than in politics. We take strong exception to this view. We hold that the problem of the depressed classes will never be solved unless they get political power in their own hands. If this is true, and I do not think that in the contrary can be maintained, the problem of depressed classes is, I submit, eminently a political problem and must be treated as such. We know that political power is passing from the British into the hands of those who wield such tremendous economic, social and religious sway over our existence. We are willing that it may happen, though the idea of Swaraj recalls to the mind of many of us the tyrannies, oppressions and injustice practiced upon us in the past in fear of their recurrence under Swaraj. We are prepared to take the inevitable risk of the situation in the hope that we shall be installed in adequate proportion as the political sovereigns of the country along with our fellow countrymen. We will consent to that on one condition, that it is that the settlement of our problem is not left to time. I am afraid that depressed classes has waited so long for time to work its miracle. At every successive step taken by the British government to widen the scope of representative government, the depressed classes have been systematically left out. No thought has been given to their claim for the political power. I protest with all the emphasis I can that will not stand this any longer. The settlement of our problem must be a part of general political statement and must not be left over to the general political settlement and must not be left over to the shifting sounds of sympathy and goodwill of the ruler of the future. The reason why the depressed classes insisted upon it are all obvious. Every one of us knows that the man in position is more powerful than the man who is out of position. Every one of us also know that those in the position of power seldom abdicate in favor of those who are out of it. We cannot therefore hope for the effectuation of the settlements of our social problem. We are allowed power to slip into the hands of those who stand too loosely by settlement unless we are to have another revolution to dethrone those who we today help us to ascend the throne of power and prestige. We prefer being despised for too anxious apprehension and ruined by too confinement as security. And I think it would be just the power for us to insist that the best guarantee for the settlement of our problem is the adjustment of the political machine itself so as to give us a hold of it, and not the will of those who are contriving to left is unfettered control of that machine. What adjustment of the political machine the depressed classes want for their safety and protection? I will place before the conference at the proper time. All I will say at the present moment is that although we want a responsible government, we do not want a government that will only mean a chance of master. Let us legislature be fully and really representative if your executive is going to be fully responsible. I am sorry, Mr. President, I had to speak in such plain words, but I saw no help. The depressed classes have had no friends. The government has all along used them only as an excuse for its continued existence. The Hindu claim that them only to deny that them or better still to appropriate right. The Mohammedans refuse to recognize their separate existence because they fear that their privilege may be curtailed by the admission of the rival. Depressed by the government, suppressed by the Hindus and disregarded by the Muslims, we are left in the most intolerable position of utter helplessness to which I am sure there is no parallel and to which I was bound to call attention. Regarding the other question, which is set down for discussion, I am sorry it was decided to tag it on to a general debate. It is important to deserve a discussion of for itself. No justice can be done it in a passing reference. The subject is one of which the depressed classes are deeply concerned and they regard it as a very vital question. As member of minority, we look to the central government to act as a powerful curb on the provincial majority to serve the minority from the misrule of the majority. As an Indian interested in the growth of Indian nationalism, I must make it plain that I am a strong believer in the unitary form of government, and the thought of disturbing it, must confess, does not please me very much. This unitary government must have been the most important influence in the building up of the Indian nation. The process of unification which has been the result of unified system of government has not been completed, as I should be loath to withdraw the most powerful stimulus in the formative period and before it has worked out its end. However, the question in the form which it is placed is only an academic question, and I shall be prepared to consider a federal form. If it can be shown that in the local autonomy it is not inconsistent with central unity, sir, that all that I, as a representative of the depressed classes, need say on their behalf I have said. May I carve your indulgence to permit me as an Indian to say a word or two generally on the situation which we have to meet.